that we now come to chapter 6 in this book of mine, which, as it happens, is entitled The Seven Elements. The fact that Joy spent a certain amount of time this morning talking about this subject, and Geoffrey spent most of this afternoon talking about it, you might well think, what is there left to say about the subject by this time?
Now Adam can set us all straight.
As I indeed was thinking as I sat there, what on earth am I going to say?
Repetition is necessary.
Repetition, yes. As Joy informed me or reminded me when I mentioned this to her earlier, she said that we all seem to have a different perspective on this subject, and I guess while we're all different and all human, we always will all have a different perspective on the subject. So with that apology for going over the same ground a third time in the same day, let's have a look at this. The first section, the first paragraph in chapter 6 of the book is a reminder of a theme which has been a persisting theme throughout this week, it seems to me, and that is that the cosmos with which we are concerned is a living cosmos, and that there is no part of it which in any sense can be considered dead or inanimate. I remember talking about this a little while ago on another occasion, and there is a certain tautology about saying that everything is alive, is there not? This is right like saying that everything is up as opposed to down, that everything is black as opposed to white, everything is living as opposed to dead. What distinction is there left, you might well ask? Well, it's the distinction that we apparently make. It is we who make or have made this arbitrary distinction between that which is living and that which is dead, and have behaved as if there is an artificial dividing line somewhere between that which is living and that which is inanimate or dead, not living. And the theosophical position cuts through that perception of the nature of cosmos and says that there is no such dividing line. And what we are looking at is a continuum wherein there is difference in degree, but ultimately no difference in kind. So the apparent tautology is just that, apparent, but not real. Now, when we come to the subject in hand, the reason I remind you of this is that ostensibly, in talking about the seven elements, we are dealing with the object side of nature, as opposed to the subject side, consciousness, which we have been stressing so much this week. And in saying that we are dealing with the object side, it is vital that we should not slip back into thinking that there is, at some point, some ultimate stuff, matter, material, substance, the clay, so to speak, out of which the rest of the cosmos is fashioned. In the theosophical system, it would not be possible to identify any such fundamental stuff out of which the system is built. The apparent forms that we see are fabricated out of other lives. Now, it may be that the life in that which we normally regard to be inanimate is difficult to perceive for us, but it is axiomatic in the theosophical system that it is nonetheless there, and it is a failure on our part that we cannot immediately perceive it as such. When we then talk about the seven elements, it cannot be that what we're looking at is fundamental stuff under seven different names. What we are looking at, as the second paragraph attempts to outline, is that we are talking about seven qualities which pervade what we regard as form. Seven qualities. So when we use the traditional words like fire, water, earth, air, ether, and whatever else names we give for the remaining two elements, we are looking again at quality. The names that have been used for these elements are obviously very suggestive. These are not arbitrary choices which have been coined for these qualities. And sometimes instead of saying fire, we say fiery, airy, watery, earthy. And by making them, using those forms, we are giving much more a quality feel to it rather than a noun feel to it. Rather than making of them things, we are giving them quality type of words. Now, if this is so, if what we're looking at here are indeed qualities which pervade the apparently objective worlds that we find ourselves in, the big question to try and answer is whence come those qualities? And the third paragraph, section 6.3, does so identify this. It says the elements are the expression of the qualities of their associated Dhyan Chohans. And that is to a degree what Geoffrey was touching on, talking directly to this afternoon. And that is something that I propose to elaborate. The paragraph goes on to detail, or outline rather more than detail, that just as we've talked in the previous sections in this book, previous section, section 5, on the nature of hierarchies, just as there are 7 elements, potentially, so there are 7 hierarchies, or groups of Dhyan Chohans, who are responsible for imbuing form with these qualities. And that is how it comes about, but it is indirect. Now, the indirection involved in this is described in what I regard as an extremely important passage in the Secret Doctrine. And I'd like to spend a little time with you now, if you will, reading through, or very nearly a page. So I'd like you to turn to page 146 in volume 1 of the original edition. For those of you who've got the Adyar edition, I don't have the page, but it is in stanza 6, sloka 4, 146. For those of you with the Adyar edition, it's in the B commentary. It's all one colossal paragraph, so I can't give you much more assistance than that. It's about a page into the B commentary.
201, Adam.
201.
Up there, yes.
Thank you, Marianne. Now, the the picture that is being painted on this page, on 146, is a discussion of the forces that we see in our material world, such the natural forces of electricity, magnetism, light, heat, and so forth. She explains in relation to these elements, elementals, as we shall see, and indeed the Dhyan Chohans who lie behind them. So important a passage is it that I would like to read it through with you. So where I propose to start reading is in this edition, it's about 6 lines down, where it says, men of science. Men of science may term them forces. Is that on page 201, Marion?
Is that B?
It is in the B commentary. It's about a page into the B commentary.
6 lines.
Yes,
146.
halfway, it's just about 3/4 of the way down the page.
Thank you.
On the right-hand side of the line of the page.
Hmm.
Nine lines up.
Thank you. Are you all there? No? Yes? Good. So, men of science may term them force or forces generated by matter. These are these forces that we normally regard in the sciences. Or modes of motion, if they will. Occultism sees in the effects elemental forces, and in the direct causes producing them, intelligent, divine workmen. These are our builders, in effect. The intimate connection of those elementals, guided by the unerring hand of the rulers, their correlation we might call it, with the elements of pure matter, results in our terrestrial phenomena such as light, heat, magnetism, and the rest. She is setting up one might even say a hierarchy of causes here, a causal hierarchy, as to the objective phenomena that we see around us. Now she elaborates this and goes on to say more about it, and it's very well worth reading on. Of course, she says, we shall never agree with the American substantialists, whoever they might be. I don't know whether the American substantialists still exist, whether such a position is still maintained. Whoever they were, who call every force and energy, whether light, heat, electricity, or cohesion, an entity. For this would be equivalent to calling the noises produced by the rolling of the wheels of a vehicle an entity. Now she goes on to draw a picture, a word picture here, which is very much rooted in the 19th century. You have to remember that at the time she was writing, there weren't any cars or automobiles, and we were still in the age of the horse-drawn carriage. And at that time, the driver sat on the box at the front, outside, and held the reins to drive the horse, whereas the owner, or whoever was riding in the carriage, sat inside and was carried along. And it's that sort of picture that this goes on to describe. So we would never call the noise produced by the rolling wheels an entity, thus confusing and identifying that noise with the driver outside and the guiding master intelligence within the vehicle. But we certainly would give that name, in other words, the name of entity, to the drivers and to those guiding intelligences. So we've got a distinction here between the drivers, whoever it is holding the reins, and whoever it is sitting in the carriage being drawn along in this way. Both of those we would describe as entities. The ruling Diane Chohans has shown. The elementals, or nature forces, are the acting, though invisible or rather imperceptible, secondary causes, and in themselves the effects of primary causes behind the veil of terrestrial phenomena. All terrestrial phenomena. If you will, then we could picture this to ourselves in a rather interesting way, and it's a diagram which is going to grow a bit as the afternoon proceeds. So the picture that we end up with, you might view in this way, that at the center, the heart of the cosmic process, we have the Diane Chohans. I just lump them all together in one mass at the moment. All the various hierarchies are all, so to speak, at the heart of cosmos. Emanating from them, in this picture, are the elementals. Now, the elementals that it's describing in this particular passage, in either here or in another, I think it's on this very page, she says that the one is the other. Towards the bottom of this page, skipping just a little bit onward from where we were, perhaps I'll add one more circle before we can go any further. And we'll call this forces, just for sake of convenience. This is my causal hierarchy that I referred to before. You will see that the one is responsible for the other, which in turn is responsible for the outermost ring. So as it goes on to say, electricity, light, heat. Is that the one I want to read? No, skip that sentence and move on one. The sensation of light is like the sound of the rolling wheels, a purely phenomenal effect having no existence outside the observer, Now that is a very startling sentence. Purely terrestrial effect having no existence outside the observer. We are back into our participatory universe with a vengeance here, aren't we? I have more to say about that. I will come back to that in a minute. The proximate, the approximate exciting causes of the sensation is comparable to the driver of the carriage, the one sitting on the outside on the box holding the reins. A supersensuous state of matter in motion, a nature force or elemental. Behind every phenomenon, such as light and heat, stands an elemental or nature force. Now don't personify these elementals too quickly, please. I don't want you to imagine gnomes and salamanders standing behind every light beam. Not quite like that. But behind even this stand, just as the owner of the carriage directs the driver from within, the higher and noumenal causes, the intelligences. Now listen to this next sentence, this next phrase. These intelligences from whose essence radiate these states of mother, generating the countless milliards of elementals or psychic nature spirits. So these Dayan Chohans that we've talked about here are not just the controlling entities, but the very source of these elemental entities that we've just referred to. They generate them, countless milliards. Milliards, I think, are tens of thousands or tens of millions for all I know. Can't remember. Anyway, lots and lots emanated from these Dayan Chohans in this particular way. A rather fascinating picture. From whose essence radiates the states of mother, generating the countless milliards of elementals or psychic nature spirits, just as every drop of water generates its physical infinitesimal infusoria. And then we come back to Fohat, which was what Joy was talking about this morning. So this whole picture is intimately connected with what Joy was talking about this morning. Now, two additional things to add to this diagram, two additional things to say. Firstly, how would it be if we now were to divide this up into 7 in our usual way? Now, the sevenfold that we would see in here would be the 7 hierarchies that we have already been talking about this week, without distinction as to which 7 hierarchy. It doesn't matter whether it's inner or outer, more significant, less significant, solar or planetary. There is a pattern here, this 7-fold patterning that the Dayan Chohans embody. To these, then they would generate elementals of their like, of their kind, within their quality. And these in turn will correlate to the forces of nature that we see emerging. And if we wanted to talk about the elements, as we started out and as we're indeed supposed to be talking about in this session, then somewhere in here we would talk about those inherent qualities. Now, quite arbitrarily, and not meaning this to be taken in any particular order or adding too much significance to it. The 7 elements that we talk about emanate from the Dayan Chohans, are embodied in the elementals, are expressed in form, the worlds of form, the outermost circle, either in terms of what we see as objective substance or as what we see as the forces of nature. After all, as a science, physics,